Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear all right.
Good. Good evening, everybody. As this is the last session of this series with Professor Krishna, I would like to take this opportunity to wholeheartedly thank Professor Krishna for these great lectures and question answers meeting. We are very grateful that Professor Krishna shares his understanding of Krishnamurti's teachings with us. As you know, Krishnamurti's teachings are not easy, and having somebody like Professor Krishna helping us with that is really very much appreciated. Many people told me that these sessions are very, very valuable. And even on a personal level, I can say I learned a lot from these past sessions. I also found the articles and videos that Professor Krishna sent us to study very, very interesting. And now I have some good news. Professor Krishna agreed to give another series of lectures and question-answer meetings in October. The moment we have the topics, the format, and the dates, we will let you know. Again, Professor Krishna, thank you so much for this series and for being willing to give us another series in October. And now I would like to thank also very much the dialogue group in the Bay Area for having worked with us in organizing this series. It's always a great pleasure to work with the Bay Area Dialogue Group, and it always works. And again, a great pleasure to working with all of you. And a special thank you to Prasad and his close friends, because they did all the technical work. And you can imagine there are many, many volunteer hours involved in that. And again, we appreciate that very, very much, Prasad. And last but not least, thanks to all the participants for your good questions and for your sustained interest. I hope to see you all in October. Again, thank you, Professor Krishna, very, very much.
You're welcome.
Now it's up to Prasad. Thank you.
Prasad, you need to unmute. Oh, good.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Appreciate it. And I think we can get started with the session. And I can mute everybody, Dana.
We're good.
Okay.
Yep.
This is our last session. So I thought I would depart from the book and summarize what to me is the central message which has been conveyed to us in the last 7 readings from the book in the last 7 weeks. It brings to my mind a question Krishnamurti was asked. Can you summarize your entire teaching in one sentence? And he said, yes. Attempt without effort to live with death in futureless silence. That's how he summarized his entire teaching. To me, that means he's saying, attempt, but without the use of will, without bringing in your ego. Because usually we attempt with our ego, which brings in effort. But there is another way to understand things without bringing in the ego, which is through the learning mind. And we went into that in our sessions in detail, so I won't do it again here. The learning mind is not an egoistic mind. It's an observing mind, a mind that wants to have a deep insight into what is true and what is false, which brings in self-knowledge, which is the key to wisdom. And that wisdom alters consciousness because it ends the illusion, hopefully permanently. And correspondingly, therefore, the disorder in consciousness which arises from that illusion. Live with death means while you are still living, die to the past, die to the conditioning. That's freedom from conditioning. In futureless silence means live in the present without worries about the future as to what will happen. So that's how he summarized his whole teaching. And that's only possible when there is freedom from the ego process. So if I was asked to summarize the message that we have received in the last 7 readings of the book, I would say the greatest illusion of human beings is that acting out of self-interest is in their self-interest. It's not. Because repeatedly, in all the chapters that we read, he has pointed out that the complications arise because of the motive of self-interest behind our actions. And he points out that it is possible not to act with that motive. We have been trained through our education, through our bringing up, and it has been assumed that it is important to have self-interest in the form of ambition, in the form of competition, in the form of craving for success, and so on. But Krishnamurti points out that all these create a lot of problems in our own life and therefore also in society, because he does not separate what takes place in our consciousness from what happens in society, because society is just a projection of what takes place in human consciousness. The human consciousness is not very different from one human being to another. It's the conditioning that is different. So we all have fear, we all have desire, we all want success and avoid failure, we all seek pleasure and avoid pain. That's the common ground on which all human beings stand, wherever you may be, born or brought up. What is different is the particular beliefs with which you grow up, the rituals, the religion, the cultural differences, and so on. And when you identify with them, you call it my religion, my nation, my culture, and feel proud of it. You create division with the rest of humanity. And that division whether it is ideological, all division due to belief, or due to different aims of self-interest, all division leads to conflict and to violence. So the attempt that we have to make is to discover if there is an energy that does not come from the ego, does not come from self-interest. The way we have been brought up, when there is a self-interest, we get very much energized. And when there is no self-interest, we feel it's not important and therefore lose that energy. But the energy that is coming from the ego is destructive because it creates division, it creates violence, and so on. We have talked about the tree of disorder and said that the root of that tree is the ego. And one branch is violence, another branch is jealousy, a third branch is desire for success, and so on. All the negative emotions come out of that. And globally, also, there is that division between nations, between religions, because it is there in our consciousness, the human consciousness. We went into that, how difference turns into division. Because the mind measures, compares, identifies, and creates a division as superiority or inferiority. So the ego becomes like your personal lawyer defending the me and the mind, justifying the me and the mind, and working for the profits of the me and the mind, both psychological profits and material profits. So it's not really interested in the truth. It's interested in victory for itself. And that's how this quest for truth is subjugated by the ego process. Which means the religious mind is not there. Love is not there. Because love is where the self is not. And when self-interest is active, all relationships turn into contracts, negotiations, settlements for profit, agreements, and so on, which is not really love. It's not also friendship. So Krishnamurti talks about a wholly different way of living. And it sounds very difficult to us because right from childhood, we have lived that way, accepting self-interest as inevitable. And he points out that that has destroyed our capacity for love, our capacity for compassion, our capacity for sensing beauty, all of which require sensitivity. And sensitivity comes not from desire or from a book. It comes through contact. When you are in contact with nature, there develops a sensitivity and you perceive beauty in nature. When you are in contact with music, your mind develops a sensitivity and you develop appreciation of the beauty of music. Beauty is the joy that is innately there, experienced when the mind engages in that activity. And in every aspect of life, there is tremendous beauty in the form of that joy. There is beauty in art. There is beauty in music. There is beauty in sports and games. There is beauty in science and mathematics. There's almost no area of life in which there is not beauty if you have the sensitivity to observe, pay attention, and look for it. And that sensitivity, that contact is destroyed by ambition, which is the egoistic approach, because you are keen to achieve an end. And that end becomes important and other things become unimportant. When they are unimportant, you don't pay attention to them. So you don't pay attention to your child, you pay a lot of attention to your boss and to people who matter. And so your relationships suffer, which means we are not living with love, we are living with self-interest. So self-interest destroys sensitivity in life, destroys the perception of beauty and the experiencing of joy in our life. Therefore, we are bored. And then we cultivate pleasure or pursue pleasure in order to escape that boredom. We went into all that in great detail in these 7 sessions. I'm merely summarizing what we have already said. Globally, on a mass scale, look at the effect of what this approach from self-interest has brought into our relationships. In our relationship with nature, we have identified with human beings and ignored the suffering of animals or plants, other life forms. When you identify with any part of life, this is what happens. You can see that in operation in society. Hitler identified himself with Nazis, and therefore he could not see the suffering of the Jews. The Holocaust seemed to him to be achieving an end that is desirable. And he became insensitive to the suffering of the Jews. Netanyahu is feeling the same as Hitler when he doesn't feel the compassion for the people in the Gaza Strip who are suffering. Millions are suffering famine, hunger, children are dying. They are not, his mind says, they are not my people. They are not my responsibility. So there is a callousness that one comes through this identification. If you identify with your religion, people of another religion seem like enemies. And their suffering doesn't seem like our own suffering. All that is coming from the illusion, which is this illusion of the self, the ego. It's an illusion because it's simply a construct of thought. It's a mind that somewhere draws the line between my people and other people. Although there is no difference between my people and those other people, except perhaps what they believe or what they are conditioned into from childhood, as you are conditioned differently from childhood. It's like two IBM computers, one that has been programmed for doing accounts and another one that has been programmed for doing languages. And one computer can feel superior to the other computer by saying you can't do accounts, or the other one says you can't write poetry. Actually, they are two identical IBM computers. In the same way, two human beings are identical, both in their body and in their consciousness. The differences arise because of where you are born, where you are brought up, and so on. And because one identifies with a country or an ideology or a belief or a religion or with atheism, as soon as you identify with one fragment of humanity, you have divided yourself from the rest of humanity. So universal brotherhood of man remains just a slogan. It never really became a reality. Not even among the theosophists, who all believed in the universal brotherhood of man. So unless we free our mind of this divisive process, which starts with comparison, with evaluation, with identification, with judgment. And that judgment is done from your own conditioning. So it's not universal. And it produces hatred. It produces division, which is a precursor to violence and to war and so on. One can see this in operation. In our relationship with nature, we are all products of nature. We are born exactly in the same way as a dog is born or any other animal is born, a mammal is born. And they are our ancestors. But when you identify with humanity, you become blinded to their suffering. Millions of mammals are being sacrificed for food or for money and tortured for their skin to make shoes and so on. And we are unaware of that sorrow, that pain. Biologically, they have a nervous system which is almost as developed as our nervous system. So they feel the pain just as we feel the pain, physical pain. They may not have as much of psychological pain because they are not having an ego and they don't have much psychological problems. But physically, there is not too much difference between our bodies and their bodies. And yet we are oblivious to their suffering, exactly as Hitler was oblivious to the suffering of the Jews, and Netanyahu is oblivious to the suffering of the Palestinians. If we continue to make the same mistake, we contribute to that violence, to war in the world. And that's an important thing which Krishnamurti taught. Not that we should accept what Krishnamurti says, we need to investigate it. He himself says that, don't accept what I say. Investigate it in order to come upon the truth. The truth is important, not what I say. And what I say can only act as a mirror to help you to see yourself. Once you have seen yourself, you can throw away the mirror. You don't have to depend on the book of Krishna. Once you learn how to observe life and to learn from your observation, you don't need Krishna. All this is what we learned in the last 7 sessions. And so the work that has to be done is to discover this energy which is not derived from the ego. It comes from sensitivity. Unfortunately, the way we have been brought up with competition, with rivalry, with a certain notion of success and a certain notion of progress has destroyed that sensitivity. So we don't experience that joy. And that's what the transformation is. The transformation of consciousness basically is to go from a self-centered consciousness to a consciousness which acts out of love and sensitivity. Love, compassion are sensitivity. Non-violence is sensitivity. That's the essence of religion. If that is not there, all the religious beliefs and all the rituals and prayers have very little meaning. They are cultural artifices. Once you have that spirit of religion, which is the spirit of love, compassion, and non-violence, then the rituals and the prayer may have meaning. But without that spirit, it has not the meaning. This is true of all aspects of our life. There is both a structure, a method or techniques, and a right spirit in which to engage in that activity. In sports and games, there is technique of playing the sport or games, the rules of the game. But there is also the sportsman spirit, which says, try to excel, value the excellence and the joy of playing. And if the other man wins or the other team wins, they played better than you, there is nothing to feel sorrow or unhappy. You appreciate them, you congratulate them, and you want to play more with them. So the whole attitude changes if you don't approach it from the idea of competition and victory. Unfortunately, throughout life, our education and our bringing up in society has given tremendous importance to achievement. The man who can jump 0.5 millimeter more than everybody else is treated as a hero, given huge amounts of money and applauded. And if he happens to be German, it feels like victory for Germany over other nations. It's just that one man played better than others on that particular day. So the mind creates all kinds of illusions, false feelings based on that illusion. You feel it is your victory when it is just that individual played better than another individual on that particular day. All this one can observe in one's own life. And that's the learning, to free ourselves from that kind of sentiment. Because otherwise, division is inevitable, rivalry, which comes from competitive feeling, is inevitable. Then your classmate doesn't appear to be your friend, but your rival. And it appears as if you are in a race with the rest of humanity with whom you are living, which is all a false notion. So these are the illusions, and self-knowledge is the process by which illusions are supposed to end. And that is the key to wisdom. And without wisdom, all progress only brings power, and power without wisdom is destructive. So there has been this lopsided development of the human mind. And Krishnaji is saying, unless we correct for that, it will always go wrong. You can keep doing social work, but you will not eliminate war, you will not eliminate insecurity, you will not eliminate crime, all that violence, nothing will go, because you are yourself supporting that, contributing to that in the world. It's like if each one of us has violence in our consciousness, we create a whole sea of violence in humanity. In that sea, sometimes there is a storm in the Middle East, sometimes in Kashmir, sometimes in Los Angeles, in different parts of the world. And we become active trying to solve that problem in that place. They will probably create some kind of agreement between the Jews and the Arabs in the Middle East with the help of United Nations and so on, though it seems very far-fetched right now. But that agreement will keep breaking down, because the real cause is the psychological hatred between the communities, and that is not being tackled. So unless you eliminate the real cause, the effect is bound to recur. That is a law. It is as true in religion as it is in science. The same cause produces the same effect. Its manifestation may be different. War 1,000 years ago was not as destructive in its manifestation as it is today, because we have much bigger power. We have nuclear power and so on. We were not capable of destroying nature on the scale on which we are able to destroy now. So our greed, using nature as a resource for development, for earning money, for so-called progress, is destroying nature. And we are ourselves part of nature. You can't survive. They say even if one of the species is completely eliminated, human beings will not survive. That's what the ecologists say, the biologists say, because there is a tremendous order which has been established in nature over millions of years. And human beings were part of that order until about 200-300 years ago. And then with the development of science and technology, we have come upon all this power, and we are now beginning to destroy that nature's order. And if you destroy that order, you can't restore it voluntarily. That's why we have this global warming and so on. And the scientists are now saying we have reached a point of no return, that we are going to face major devastations in the next 50 years, and perhaps by the end of this century, we will annihilate ourselves. So are we really progressing? Or it is all an illusion? This progress is not really progress. What we call intelligence is not really intelligence. Krishnamurti says, there is no intelligence without compassion. He said, put your intellect in your heart. It has no value outside you. Very strong statements. I'm not asking you to agree with them. I'm asking you to look at them, consider them, investigate whether that is true. Because he was a wise man, and so was Jesus Christ, and so was the Buddha, and so was Socrates. And we must not ignore what these wise people have said. We must investigate it. We don't have to simply accept or agree with what they say. So all this, in my opinion, is the message that we have received in the last 7 weeks. To my mind, this is the biggest message from our readings of the last 7 weeks. I'll end it here, and perhaps we can have discussions, some time for questions and answers. And if we fall short of time, please feel free to send your questions to Mr. Prasad Kongara, who will collect them and send them to me, as we have done in previous sessions. And I shall give brief responses to those through email. Thank you. And best wishes for a deep inquiry into life.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. Would you like to take a break? Or shall we just go on?
As you wish. As you wish.
Prasad?
I don't need a break, but some people might need a break. There are many elderly people who might need to go to the bathroom and so on. Yeah. So be kind, give them 5 minutes. And
Or
then
the
we
young
can.
ones too. All right, so we'll take a short 5-minute break.
Young ones may be rebellious, may be angry.
They need to go jump up and down,
Yeah.
sitting too
Their
long.
problems are different. Their problems are different from our problems.
All right, we'll take a short break. 5 minutes, everyone.
Thank you.
So are we ready for the questions?
Professor Krishna, can you unmute? Can you unmute?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Oh, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we have our question and answer session, part of the session. The first one is from Dakshinamurti. Dear Sir, in some of his talks, Kay raised the question whether thought can be aware of itself, its movement. Kay was very emphatic by saying that it is not the thinker that is aware of thought, but rather thought per se is aware of itself. My question is, as the thinker is the thought, as pointed out by Kay, what is the significance of thought being aware of itself?
I personally think that Krishnamurti did not go through a formal education as we all do in school, college, and university. And therefore, he often uses words with different meanings at different times, and he doesn't define his terms very precisely. This was pointed out to him. And he said, sir, I will deliberately do that. I will deliberately change my words, because in any case, you have to go behind the word and come upon the truth. So it's not terribly important to make very precise statements. The precise statement is not the truth. Therefore, he was not like a scientist trying to. We are taught in science to make a statement which cannot be interpreted in two different ways. He never went through such training. So he is often quite lax in his language. In my view, thinking is quite separate from faculty, from awareness. His own teaching says that thought comes from memory, whereas awareness is an intrinsic quality of consciousness. You can be aware also of your thoughts. When you look at a tree, you are aware of the tree. When you think about the tree and want to describe it to your friend, you will talk about its height, its range, its stem, its color, its leaf. So you break it into parts and describe the parts. That is the nature of thought. But awareness sees the whole of the tree. It doesn't break it up into leaf and branch and root and so on. So it has a more holistic quality to it. So I don't understand the term thought being aware of itself. It is a puzzle to me also. But one possible meaning could be that through awareness, you come to know something, and that you have come to know through insight, through perception, something, and that informs thought. Because thought has to be used ultimately to communicate. That is the job of thought. It can also create the question, like we are right now creating a question using thought. And I am answering it using thought. So all this kind of activity is intellectual activity, explanation and so on is possible, but insight is a different matter. And so is awareness, quite a different matter. Right now, my thought process is engaged in deciding what I want to communicate to you. But I am aware of the light, the computer, the fan working up above me, and the surroundings of my room and the time and so on. So awareness has a more holistic quality to it and is quite different from thinking. But awareness can inform thought and then thought may know. So insights are brought by scientists and artists and religious men into the field of the known. And when they come into the field of the known, then thought gets informed about it. I don't know whether that should be called awareness of thought, because that word awareness itself is sometimes used as knowledge. You can ask, are you aware of the capital of England? Which means you are just asking, do you know the capital of England? But we use the word awareness sometimes to mean, do you know? So these words are not precisely defined, and you have to allow that fact when Krishnaji uses the word ego and brain and consciousness and so on. You have to go behind the word and get the possible meaning he may be having. This is not interpretation. Interpretation is inevitable, because even when you read Krishnamurti's book yourself, your own mind is also interpreting the meaning of those words. And that interpretation is based on your conditioning. You have a conditioned mind which is interpreting the meaning. So the interpretation is, to that extent, is inevitable. It's when you accept that meaning given by the interpretation as truth that the error comes. Truth is at the level of perception, not at the level of description. The best definition of love is not love. You can have the definition, and philosophy will accept that. It's an intellectual activity. But religiously, it is love only when you perceive it and you come upon it in your consciousness, so that you have a direct contact with the state of love.
Next, we have more of an organizational question, maybe from Reno Aurora. Excellent summary of our total life. Can it be shared in any format, for example, PDF or PowerPoint or video of today's lecture without Q&A? If the video is uploaded, which channel to go to?
Yeah, I think Prasad Kongara is trying to put it on a certain channel in YouTube, and I request him to inform all the participants when he has done that. So all these talks will be available to you or accessible on YouTube.
Yes, we'll publish them in a couple of days. So we have some access issue to the Professor's channel, and we have found an alternative. So we can proceed with uploading the videos, and we will make them available soon.
Great, thank you. Now I will read a question from Sanjay Kanodia. Please elaborate in more detail on Kay saying, keep your intellect in the heart.
Actually, biologically, the heart is not thinking. It's all in the brain. When we use the word heart, we mean emotions like love and compassion and so on are considered qualities that belong to the heart. But actually they operate through the mind only. Awareness also operates through the mind, through the brain. If the brain is put to sleep, you are unconscious. There is no awareness in unconsciousness. So it's just a linguistic thing. Heart is usually referring to qualities of love, compassion, aesthetics, and so on. Whereas mind or refers to the intellect.
Now we have a question from Suromita. Why is it difficult for one to see one's own illusion, whereas it seems easier to see that in others?
Because one identifies with one's own illusion. And one has a certain attachment to one's own illusion, to one's own opinions, to one's own country, and so on. And so the ego is strongly operating and has a preference for the first person singular. That blocks the that makes for the difference between looking at one's own opinions and looking at your friend's opinion. When you identify yourself with something, an attack on what you have identified with feels like an attack on yourself. And so immediately the defense comes up, and that is the ego process.
So now I will read a question from Ravi. I'm starting to have doubts whether this brain will ever be free from effort, movement, seeking, motive, and goals. Why is there's only partial seeing, but not total seeing of the futility of this?
I have that doubt too, because very few human beings have broken through this prison of the ego into which human beings are trapped. It seems like a more pernicious habit than even alcoholism or drug addiction, which can be given up or helped by chemical means to give up. But the ego, you can't give up with drugs or medicines and so on. It's much more subtle. And it hides behind noble words and so on. So a very deceptive thing. That's why it's very hard work. The work is of paying attention, close attention, because opposites often look very similar. Attachment looks just like love. You are caring for the person you are attached to, and it feels like love because when you love, also you care that way. So outwardly, it appears the same. It brings to my mind a conversation which is there in the Gita, where Arjuna the warrior asks Krishna the god, what is the liberated man like? How does he work? How does he sleep? How does he eat? Tell me. And Krishna gives a long reply which you can read in the Gita if you have access to a book of it. But the summary, the gist of it is that outwardly he will appear to be the same as the ordinary man. He eats like the ordinary man, he sleeps like the ordinary man, he works like the ordinary man. But it's not the same thing because he doesn't do it for the same reasons. That means the motive is different, not the outer work is not different. And Krishnamurti said something similar when he said, the religious mind can do any work. It will change the way that work is done. So it's not that some work is religious and other work is not religious. The religiosity is in the mind, in the approach. If you are doing it with love and compassion, it is religious. If you are doing it with ego, it is not religious.
Next is a question from Suromita. Krishna ji speaks about the nature of consciousness being divisive. What makes it divisive?
The condition. He says consciousness is, as we know it, is its content. Because all your thinking, all your decisions depend on your conditioning. And the conditioning constitutes the content. Unless you empty the consciousness of the content, which means you are free of it, doesn't literally mean empty in the sense erase it. It means you discover that it is not important. It is something that has just happened as an accident of birth. Then it doesn't interfere or doesn't have the same importance in your consciousness, and therefore doesn't interfere in your perceptions. That's freedom from conditioning. But so long as you are not free from conditioning, the conditioning divides. The conditioning of the Hindu is different from the conditioning of the Muslim, and they use their judgments based on their conditioning, and their judgments are different. For the Muslim, it's quite normal for a widow to get married again. For the Hindu, it's wrong for a widow to marry again. She is still being disloyal to her husband because they believe that the marriage is for several births. It's not only this birth. So the feelings and the things, everything is affected by the conditioning, religious conditioning, and so on. These things create differences of opinion, and because we have not learned to look at opinions without identifying with them, it creates division. But if you can treat those opinions as just different opinions to be looked at, then it doesn't create division. But when you identify with one particular opinion, you are divided from your friend who has a different opinion.
Next, we have a question from Urmi. How to discriminate and understand the action without self? Suppose a boy feels strongly about taking up a career which his parents don't approve of. Should he pursue his passion or not?
This is a problem in relationship because the parents have in turn been brought up with false notions in their mind about life. They look upon their child as a possession, and they want to use that child to fulfill their ambitions and their desires. Often a father will say, I couldn't become a doctor, but I want my son to become a doctor. And so he forces his son to take up a course in medicine, when that boy may not be interested in doing medicine. So this possessiveness is a curse. If you look at your child as a friend, you are more interested not in fulfilling your desires through the child, but in helping that child to do what would make him happy. So your concern is about him and not about you and your desire and your fulfillment. So the problem comes because the parents don't quite understand, they have not grown up or been brought up rightly. And therefore there is a conflict between what the parent wants and what the child wants. It's not an easy thing to solve. Sometimes the school can help the child by talking to the parent. I have done that in many cases when I was principal of the school. And generally in India, the parents listen if you talk to them sympathetically and explain. So that's the answer to it. I think when there is a conflict like that, the practical course to be adopted is that the son can talk to a friend of the father who may understand the problem and talk to his father, because the father won't listen to the son. That's the problem of hierarchy. Right from childhood, he has brought up this boy, and he feels he knows much better than the boy does. And therefore, he ignores what the boy is saying. So it's a complicated problem. But in practical terms, I have found that you can generally find another person whom your father respects and to whom he will listen. And when that message is given through that person, the parent listens to it, and the problem is sometimes solved like that.
I will read a question from Ravi now. Attention is always divided. Conscious attention and the ever-revolting natural conditioned attention or distraction. And these two bring conflict in one's brain. This divided attention is not letting one learn or understand it oneself. And why is understanding oneself so difficult?
There is no such thing as distraction. It is when you want to concentrate on something, you are forcing your mind to pay attention only to that. That's when the mind wanders to something else, you treat that as distraction. But if you pay attention to where the mind is wandering and look at what the mind is looking at, you can usually come back without resisting it. But all our life we have been taught to resist. We have been taught to discipline ourselves. We have been taught you should do this, you should do that, and so on. So there is a conflict between what actually takes place and what you think should be happening. you can just concentrate on what is happening rather than what should be happening, which is a imaginary thing in your mind, then there is no such conflict.
Thank you, Professor. Now we have a question from Sanjay Kanodia. Why do people who are sensitive suffer a lot at both levels, psychological and physical, when we say that sensitivity leads to love and beauty?
There are two different senses in which that word sensitivity is used. One is the intensity with which you feel things. That is sensitivity, as Krishnamurti talks about. The other is, he is very sensitive on this issue, which means he is very touchy. If you say something there, it hurts him, and so on. So that is an area of attachment, which is part of the ego. And people are touchy about their image, their self-image, which is what the ego creates, your opinion of yourself. And when somebody criticizes that opinion of yourself or that self-image, there is feeling of psychological hurt, and you dislike the person who has criticized you. So this whole thing has to be understood, and one has to find out whether one can be free of this self-image. Why does one have a self-image? Is it because we want to impress others? Is it because we want others to have a high opinion of us? And if so, why? Why is the opinion of other people so important?
Now I will read a question from Hansa. Human nature is shaped by upbringing. How then can one judge what is right or wrong?
You cannot. It is always relative to your conditioning that this concept of right and wrong exists. It varies from culture to culture, and even within the culture, it varies from family to family, depending on the value system with which you have grown. Usually, whatever you have been told is wrong appears to be wrong. What you have been told is right appears to be right. And this is just a tradition in your family or in your culture or in your religion coming from there. It's not a fundamental truth.
Next, we have a question from Ravi. Is it possible to have choiceless awareness as the mind is constantly throwing its conditioned perception and coloring the seeing?
Find out. Don't expect other people to answer this for you. And in any case, the other person's answer, however wise he may be, even if it is Krishnamurti, is not an answer for you. So you will have to find that out for yourself.
And now a question from Chandra. There are two questions within the paragraph, but I think they refer to the same thing. So I will read both of them. Kay says he does not believe in evolution, but revolution. Evolution is still refined conditioning and is time-bound, while revolution is instant. How does one break free from conditioning without evolving over time? Even Kay's teachings evolved when he was part of Theosophy versus when he was not, year after year. So the question is, what is wrong with evolution when it comes to breaking free from conditioning?
Krishnamurti did not deny biological evolution, which is Darwin's theory and so on. Denied psychological evolution. And you can question it. But if you look at society, human society, 3,000 years ago, if you have read the Mahabharata, all the characters that were there in the Mahabharata are still present in our present society. There is an Arjuna, there is a Duryodhana, there is a Yudhishthir, there is Dhritarashtra, there is Krishna. All of them exist today as they existed then. So has humanity really progressed psychologically? No. And psychologically, the future is now. Unless you transform radically at the level of consciousness, the future is now. Because the same attitudes, the same conditioning continues. Let me explain that. You can grow in knowledge. So whatever you know today, you see beyond that and you get to know more. So the line between knowledge and the unknown expands. The area of knowledge expands. But the desire to know more depends on how you look across the line. That doesn't change. And therefore, desire still continues. It doesn't go because you have more knowledge. It requires a deeper perception of why one is discontented with what one has and why one is always seeking the more. If that way of approaching life doesn't change, the future is now. And you can see that. As a student, you were struggling, though you were living in a small room in a hostel, and you are still struggling to better the circumstances, to make a change, and so on. So this dissatisfaction and acting out of dissatisfaction to seek satisfaction, which is an ego process, continues. So if you are still going on with the ego, there is no fundamental transformation. The object of the ego may change. You may be wanting a bicycle today, and you may be wanting a Mercedes car later on, 10 years later. But the desire process is still there. And it will have its own consequences, not what is the object of desire. Similarly, fear will be there. Sorrow will be there. conflict will be there. All the psychological causes will be there because you are functioning in exactly the same psychological state. That's what it means that the future is now. Time only helps you to grow in knowledge, to grow in experience, and wisdom doesn't come from knowledge or from experience. And it's wisdom that transforms consciousness. Wisdom is the result of self-knowledge, which is the ending of illusion in the mind. So long as you continue with the same illusions, there is no change. There may be change in the circumstances, but there is no change inwardly. That's what it means the future is now, and that therefore there is no such thing as psychological evolution. You don't change with time. You change with insight.
And we have a question from Raju now. How does insight arise, sir?
It's a mysterious thing. You cannot describe a how. But strangely, the human consciousness has this capacity of insight, even when it is heavily conditioned. The conditioning does block insight, but not completely. We have in history examples like that of Emperor Ashoka. He was a very cruel king, one of the cruelest kings that existed on earth. He is a historical figure. He is not a mythological figure. But after the Kalinga War, he had a deep insight into what he had done. And he suddenly transformed into a very benevolent king and took to Buddhism, became a follower of the Buddha, and thereafter he ruled for several years and was known to be an extremely kind and generous king. So, and the other instance is that of in Hindu, I don't know whether he's a mythological figure or historical, but Valmiki was a dacoit, and the dacoit turned into a saint. So there is a famous saying in English which says, every sinner has a future and every saint has a past. So nothing blocks you completely. But if you are attached to your own state, your own conditioning, then naturally that blocks the possibility of insight. It's very unlikely that a man like Hitler will have a deep insight, though it can happen. It's more likely that a man like Gandhi will have insight. So the probability of insight increases as you grow wiser with self-knowledge. But self-knowledge is a process in time.
Since we have a single question left, I would like to read it rather than leave it for email, even though we may go over by a minute or so.
Sure, so.
And the single question is from Suromita, the last one. Following up from the earlier question, the content of consciousness makes for the divisive nature of consciousness. So Kay says the consciousness emptied of its content is not what you have known it as. What is then the true nature of consciousness?
the true nature of consciousness is awareness, which is neither knowledge nor thought nor memory, but it's a completely independent capacity which is there. You are born with it. A child is already aware when it is born. It is through that awareness and senses that he learns language, and he starts thinking, and he starts communicating, and so on. But the first thing he has is consciousness, which is pure awareness. The rest of it is all learned later on. The content is the filling up of memory, and that depends on the environment where you are born, where you are brought up, the religion that is practiced by your family, and so on, so on. So the conditioning is different.
So thank you, Professor. So that's the end of our questions. Just would like to turn it over to Professor yourself and also to Prasad.
Well, thank you. This was our last session. I wish you all the best with your inquiry into life and into what is right living. And I hope you come upon deep insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Krishna, for being so generous with your time and sharing your wisdom with us all. I also would like to thank Donna for managing these Zoom sessions, and also Krasmi for being so efficiently handling the question and answer sessions. And finally, everybody who participated, asked questions, and enabled this shared journey and experience. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you all in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.